so much for being here. Thank you so much for your continued efforts to support progress in Georgia and across the country. Thank you for being here to ensure that Stacey Abrams is elected the next governor. I know it means a lot to Stacey, and it means a lot to me that you have taken time out of your lives, that you have dug deep to support Stacey's campaign. And I have the pleasure of introducing Stacey, but before I do so, I want to speak from the heart about why we need Stacey Abrams to be the next governor of Georgia. Because I've had the opportunity over the last year and a half working alongside Reverend Raphael Warnock to serve this state. And thank all of you who made those historic victories possible. It was a huge team effort, and we sent a message about what Georgia stands for that still rings out. Thank you. And Senator Reverend Warnock and I have done a lot of good and gotten a lot done for this state in the last year and a half. And I'm proud of what we've done together, and we're going to continue to work together to deliver for this state. But I want to tell you how much more we can do for this state when we have a partner in the governor of Georgia.
Yep.
And I want to talk about two issues in particular. I want to talk about health, and I want to talk about access to the ballot box. Because there are two things that it should be abundantly clear every citizen of this great democracy deserves, and that's access to health care and access to the ballot box.
All right.
But we need a governor who believes that too. I was in Crisp County, Georgia on Wednesday of this week because I was able to secure resources working with Senator Warnock for the Crisp County Regional Medical Center to create a new transportation service so folks across rural Georgia can get to their appointments at the hospital. And that's a big win. That's a big win. But as long as we have a governor who refuses to expand Medicaid,
Boo.
then not only are rural hospitals like that one going to continue to be at risk of closure, but countless of our fellow Georgians will be sentenced to needless suffering and death. And Senator Reverend Warnock and I secured $2 billion in additional incentives for the state of Georgia to expand Medicaid. But wait until I get to the next part of the story. Because I appreciate the applause, but unfortunately that story doesn't yet have a happy ending. We secured $2 billion to help the state of Georgia to expand Medicaid. And Brian Kemp said no thank you. Stacey Abrams recognizes that every single Georgian deserves access to health care. She'll work with us to expand Medicaid in this state because it's the right thing to do for the people of this state. That's why we need Stacey Abrams as our next governor. And finally, I want to talk about access to the ballot box. And there is perhaps no one in the country who can speak with more authority and eloquence to this issue than Stacey Abrams, because of the work that she has done persistently for years and years, securing and expanding access to the ballot box for every eligible voter. But just hear me when I say, if we don't have a governor who believes that the participation in our democracy by American voters, no matter who they support, no matter what they believe, whether they're for the governor, against the governor, for the Democrats, against the Democrats, that's not what matters. What matters is that every eligible voter deserves access to the ballot box. The current occupant of the governor's mansion does not believe that, and he's shown it not just in word but in deed. Stacey Abrams believes and knows that every Georgia voter deserves access to the ballot box, and she'll fight to defend that access. That's why we need Stacey Abrams. So y'all, this is much bigger than any kind of political game. This is about human lives. This is about human wellness. This is about human health. And this is about human rights. I know Stacey. I've gotten to know Stacey pretty well. Those values are core for this candidate. They will be core for our next governor. Thank you for helping her, and please join me in welcoming the next governor of the great state of Georgia, Stacey.
Thank you. Senator Ossoff. I was talking to the senator backstage, or in the back. I want to say thank you to Best End. I want to say thank you to Tay and to the brewer and to everyone who had us here today. To all of you who are making sure there's food for us to eat and forks for us to eat with, thank you very much. We were speaking back in the back, and I was telling him about some projects I have to do. I had a very good plan, and as we are all very aware, plans do not often survive reality. But I've agreed. I'm a writer by training, and it's what I've been doing a bit for the last few years, and I have a book due. I had a whole plan for getting this book written. But in July, my father, who is here, Robert Abrams, and Rachel. My father, who is now cancer-free, but
Yay!
But my dad has been grappling with prostate cancer for nearly 15 years. It has been one of the challenges we have dealt with and talked about. I got into a little bit of news in 2018 because I deferred some tax payments, because you can defer tax payments, you can't defer cancer treatment. Right. And recently, my father, who had been able to put off the major surgery, finally had to agree that the doctors were right and that his medical degree was still in the mail. And so my dad had to have surgery. So he and my mom went to the hospital. He had the surgery, and they were planning to leave the hospital and go home. Well, standing next to my father is my niece, Faith. See, she's really pretty. Faith is my niece, my brother's daughter, but my parents have been raising her since she was 5 days old. They adopted her when she was very young. And so my parents and Faith are a family unit. But they're a family unit where no one in that family can drive right now. And so my father was getting out of the hospital after major surgery. My mother had spent every day of the 8-day stay in the hospital with him. Faith had been staying with me, and when mom and dad got out of the hospital, they wanted to go home. And I said, well, that makes sense if you suddenly have a chauffeur I don't know about. So why don't you come and stay with me? Because in the past few years, I've been able to move out of my townhouse into a slightly nicer house, and I said, why don't you come and stay with me? And after a little bit of arguing, and then them realizing I'm right, they came to stay. And it was an amazing transformation, because I got to have this sandwich generation experience that so many of us are becoming used to. I got to have my parents, who were 73, and my niece, who at the time was 14, living with me. And I got to know each of them in a very different way. And when I decided to run for governor, I marveled at just how much time and privilege I have, because I've gotten to spend this moment with them. When I launched the One Georgia tour a few weeks ago, when we went down to Cuthbert, Georgia, we went down to Cuthbert because Cuthbert is in Randolph County, and Cuthbert has lost its hospital. I was introduced by the mayor of Cuthbert, this spry and courageous man named Bobby Jenkins, this mayor who was trying to keep his community alive. And then I was introduced by a nurse named Rhonda Johnson-Jones. And the nurse, who stood there with this microphone and this beatific smile welcoming me to her community, told a story that broke my heart, Don. You see, she was a nurse who worked at this hospital, but we were standing in front of a hospital with a closed sign on it. A hospital that in the middle of COVID in southwest Georgia, the hardest hit region in our state, a hospital that shut down. She was a nurse who used to work at that hospital, who used to save lives at that hospital. But she didn't tell us the story of how she saved lives at Cuthbert. She instead told the story of how she lost her aunt because Cuthbert closed down. You see, when her aunt got into medical trouble, when she just needed an ambulance to take her to a doctor to save her life, the ambulance had to take her to Alabama and it couldn't make it. And she perished. And as I listened to that story, the story I didn't know was coming, I thought, my God, I can't imagine what that feels like. Because, you see, when my father and my mother and my niece moved in with me in July, a week and a half after moving in, my dad woke up one morning not feeling quite so well, and my mother said, Stacey, I think something's wrong with your dad. Can you call someone? So I called my doctor, and my doctor said, push on his skin. Let me know what you see. And I pushed on his skin, and when I described what was happening, she said, get him to the hospital immediately. My father was going into sepsis. And you see, I had the privilege of calling a doctor. I had the privilege of putting him in a car and getting him to the hospital. I had the privilege of having my father with me today. But if I lived in Cuthbert, Georgia, my father might be dead. And the tragedy is not simply the loss of life. The tragedy is that that woman lost her aunt not because Georgia couldn't afford to keep that hospital open. Not because the math doesn't work, because John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock said $2 billion to help keep that hospital open. That hospital closed because Brian Kemp doesn't care.
Yeah.
When you can cost people their lives and their jobs and their access to health care, and it's not about math, we've got the money. It's not even about partisanship. You see, Mike Pence, as the governor of Indiana, expanded Medicaid, and Mike Pence has never seen a liberal anything that he likes. John Kasich, as the governor of Ohio, expanded Medicaid. Jan Brewer, if you remember her name, from Arizona, she expanded Medicaid. Brian Kemp does not expand Medicaid, not because we can't afford it. It's because it's not politically salient for him. And whether it's meanness or callousness, I don't care. He is killing Georgians with his inaction. And we need a governor who cares about Georgia. My niece is 15 now. She was 14 when she moved in, and we had a big celebration in my backyard. It was just her and I to start because my mom and dad had one of the appointments my father still had to go through. Her birthday's in July, and I had the chance to watch Faith since they moved here to Georgia in 2019. My parents were raising her in Mississippi, and when they moved to Georgia, they came because we have family here. I have 5 brothers and sisters. 4 of us live here in the state. And I've gotten a chance to get to know Faith as a young woman. I got to watch her as an 8th grader who had just been moved, plucked out of Mississippi, dropped in Georgia, and tried to become a teenager and an 8th grader at the same time. And in the middle of her 8th grade year, just as she was finding her way, COVID hit. I got to know Faith as a 9th grader, a student in high school who had never seen the inside of that school, who had never met her fellow students. Someone who was trying to make sure she kept up academically but couldn't read her way to the social and emotional development that you need. And I celebrate every educator who made the tough decision to protect our children by keeping our schools closed until we could open them safely. I celebrate those who made those tough choices. Tough choices that were made despite a governor who didn't care what happened to our children as long as he got to claim victory for catering to some few people who didn't have to make the tough choices. I watched Faith as she has become a 10th grader. I now know more about World War I and the Gilded Age and polynomials than I've ever wanted to know. And I was telling John, who has a beautiful 4-month-old daughter, that I don't have children of my own, but I've taken Faith as mine for as long as my parents will let me keep her. Because I am amazed at this young woman, at her poise and her smarts, and her kindness and her ambition. And we have the privilege of giving her the support she needs. But I'm worried about the children who don't have Robert and Carolyn Abrams. The children who had to sit in McDonald's parking lots so they could get on Zoom classes. The ones who were lucky enough to find a car to get into or McDonald's to sit in front of. I'm worried about the children for whom COVID recovery isn't a date certain. And the problem that I have is that the money that is paying for their recovery right now is money that came from John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock and Joe Biden. It didn't come from Brian Kemp. He knows the numbers. He knows the statistics. And while he may have passed it off to a panel of adults who get to rule on the willingness of children to make tough decisions, I know that anyone who would sign that legislation simply doesn't care about the children of Georgia.
That's right.
Stacey and I have talked about the Trail of Tears, and we've talked about the legacy of slavery. We've talked about the difficulties that were faced by the Japanese who were interned in our nation simply because they happen to look like our enemy. And the problem I have is that rather than tell the tough stories to our young people so they grow into better citizens and resilient adults, Brian Kemp is peddling lies and false narratives, telling our teachers they've got to lie to our children about our past because he doesn't care about how they're going to deal in the future. I'm running for governor because I care about Georgia. I care about our children. I care about our schools. I care about our teachers. I care about access to health care. I care about voting rights. I care about our people. You see, I've had 4 years to do something else. You see, I applied for this job before, and you may know I didn't get it. It's okay. I put in applications before and had them rejected. But I didn't spend that time hiding my hands and ignoring the challenges we faced. I had a little bit of time, so I created an organization to fight for voting rights called Fair Fight.
Yes. Woo!
I had time. To make certain. And a little bit of time, so I wanted to make sure we had accurate count our census. And as Senator Ossoff can tell you, our census will determine our future for the next decade. Every dollar that he can secure is based on the count of our people. And to my knowledge, Fair Count spent more money on the Georgia census than the state of Georgia did. Because I knew we had to count our people and make sure everyone was included. I created the Southern Economic Advancement Project so we could help with vaccine distribution and help small communities who needed access to the Affordable Care Act money and the ARP money and the CARES money, who didn't have a staff of hundreds. They just had a couple of folks who needed more money for their communities. The money that our senators were sending here, they needed a partner to get it out. And the problem was that when they went to the governor for rent assistance, he didn't care enough to distribute the money. When unemployment was ravaging our communities, especially black communities, he didn't care enough to make sure they got their checks. Brian Kemp has proven again and again that he will serve those he likes and will ignore those he doesn't. And as I racked my brain to figure out why, the simplest truth revealed itself. Brian Kemp just doesn't care. Well, I think if you don't care about the people you serve, you need to find another job. So I'm here to ask you for your help. This is going to be a long election. Thank you. We've got 29 weeks to go. 29 weeks when they're going to call me everything but a child of God. 29 weeks when we have to grapple with the consequences of his inaction, his ineptitude, and his lack of integrity. We've got 29 weeks when in the midst of a public safety crisis, his solution is to sign criminal carry legislation.
Yes.
Knowing that 5,200 people in 2020 got permits to carry, they were denied permits to carry concealed weapons because of felony convictions, because of domestic abuse accusations, because of mental health hospitalizations. 5,200 people who were told, no, you can't carry a weapon because of the bill he signed with great fanfare can now go through a loophole that's larger than Stone Mountain. That's because Brian Kemp doesn't care about public safety. He cares about political gamesmanship, and we need to send him home. I have plans for Georgia. I have plans to expand Medicaid, to fully fund education, to create a $10 million fund to make sure small businesses like this one get access to the capital and the commerce that they need. I have plans to make certain our children are stronger than they've ever been. I have plans to make certain that no matter which community you that we don't guarantee your success, but we guarantee your access.
All right.
Yeah.
I have plans to make certain that the privileges I've had the great fortune to enjoy in the last few years aren't mine alone.
Amen.
You see, I grew up working poor. My mother called us the genteel poor. We had no money, but we watched PBS and we read books. I remember my dad working from sun up to sun up, and then going out on the weekends, picking up wood and doing every small odd job he could find to take care of his family.
All right.
I know what it felt like 4 years ago when I had to write an essay about the fact that debt does not disqualify you from service. And now I've got to defend myself from because success apparently is now demonized by Republicans.
Yeah.
But I know who I am.
Amen.
I am a Georgian. And I know what I am. I am someone committed to serving each of you. And I know why I am. Because now is a time where too much pain is covering up our promise. I'm running for governor because I know what we can do because I've been there. I've been at the city level, the state level, and I've worked great with our federal folks. And with a partner like John Ossoff, and a partner like Raphael Warnock, with a partner like Joe Biden, we can lift this state up. We can rise together. We can run together. And we can win together.